4, 3, 2, 1. Happy Thursday, and welcome once again to another edition of Jedi Lunch Break Live, Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Strategies in 15 minutes or less. I am your Justice, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion Master, your Jedi Master for this quick 15-minute tip. Holly Holiday of Holiday Advisors. I can hardly believe that today is week 10 of our Jedi Lunch Break Live series. We are going to keep it going. If you joined us last week, then you know we are in the middle of a 3-part series on how do I know if my company or organization is taking DEI or workplace culture seriously. I had an opportunity last week to also join one of my favorite people, Rosalind Brock, on a panel discussion around this very issue with the lovely ladies of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. And it really spurned and validated for me, especially the wonderful comments that I got back from the people who participated in that panel of how much this was needed, of how much uncertainty there is about whether or not their workplaces are taking DEI seriously. How do they know? Just things that they could do. And so just to kind of recap last week, what I really wanted to focus on are people who are in that job search space and giving them some tips, because sometimes from the outside looking in, it's hard to know what to believe. And as we're in the middle of a job search process, let's face it, everybody has on their best foot. Right? Everybody from you as an applicant to companies and organizations, they want you to see the best of them. And I'll be honest and say, if they're really smart, they want you to see the aspiration of who they hope to be. And I suspect that as a job seeker, you may be doing the exact same thing. So what does that mean? What it means is last week I shared with you 3 quick things that you can look at. So if you missed that, check the videos out. But a quick recap is, number 1, whether or not there is a public-facing diversity, equity, and inclusion statement. And remember, I use JEDI here, which is Justice, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion. Other firms may use DEI. You may also see DEIA, DEIB. As long as it is a statement that refers to some level of equity and inclusion, and it is public facing, I suggest that you read it and check and see if it includes specific commitments and strategies that the institution is doing to address equity or acknowledge systemic oppression. Number 2, see who manages the DEI work, whether or not they have a separate individual or team of individuals who are doing that work. I would suggest that if it is a large institution in particular, you want to make sure that it is a team. Large institutions being anything over 150 or above. But the most important thing is not only whether or not they have a person and or team, but who does that report to, and is it a separate vertical? Specifically, is it a separate vertical from human resources? Because DEI is more than just human resources. It is about workplace culture, and it should be a part of every single part of an organizational process or a company's business. And if it reports to HR, it means that they only see it as it relates to talent and not see it as it relates to systems and culture. And then finally, you want to look at how the company is spending its resources. You want to ask about whether or not they have an employee resource group, ongoing training around DEI issues and topics, and whether or not there's an intentional professional development program and mentoring program. So that's a quick recap. If you want more detail, and believe me, I give you a lot more detail, check out what I said last week. This week, however, We are delving into part 2 of this part 2 of 3. So we have one more session on this, but today we're going to deal into part 3 of how do I know whether or not my company or organization is taking DEI and workplace culture seriously. And this time we're going to look at some things that you probably will have as a person who is actually employed for the organization. I think it is important when you are assessing whether or not your company or organization is taking it seriously, you got to keep in mind that some of these indicators may depend on the specific context and industry. So there may be some variation, but in general, these are good places to start. And so today I'm going to give you 3 more tips. And then next week, I'm going to delve in with our final 3 tips, and then we'll move on to a different subject. But this one is so deep and I get so many questions about it. I really wanted to make sure that I covered it as thoroughly as possible. Okay, so today's tips. First, I think you need to look at leadership commitment. You need to check and make sure that the leadership of the company or organization, and leadership in this case starts with the CEO, the president, the C-suite folks, not just the middle managers, not just your supervisor in particular, but what does the head of the organization say about these issues? Are they engaged and involved? Look for public commitments, public statements and policies, actions that prioritize diversity, equity, inclusion. And these are things that you want to hear, as they say, directly from the horse's mouth. So you may even look for statements not just made internally to staff, like staff calls or all staff meetings, staff memos, but you also want to look at if this is a person who is frequently quoted in the press and does interviews or makes public statements about their workforce and about how their company operates in the world. Do they include statements of equity and inclusion? Do they acknowledge that diversity, equity, inclusion is a part of their business practice? Okay. Number 2, you want to look at the written policies and practices. Now, I say policies and practices because there are sometimes a few differences between what's written down on the paper and what shows up in practice. Now, you can't write everything down. So this isn't to say that there is a lack of alignment between policies and practices. It is simply to say that everything can't be written in a policy handbook. And so what you see in practice may be a little bit different, or may evolve, or may not incorporate the spirit, even though it may incorporate the letter of the policy. Evaluate. So here what you want to do is look at the company's comprehensive and written policies. Listen, this starts with the employee handbook. That's right. That thing that you got the first day you joined, you probably got it electronically. You signed off on it electronically. You stored it in a file, or hopefully you didn't delete it. And if you did, you should ask for another copy. But you probably have never read it because it just seems boring. But it includes a lot of key provisions and tells you exactly how the company views the workplace, as well as how you can protect yourself if you need to, if you feel like you have been a victim of discrimination. But here's some key things to look at. Look at whether or not in the policies there's an equal opportunity policy. There probably is, because that's the law. There definitely will be anti-discrimination policies. But also look for any kinds of accommodations. Look for how things are managed if there is a problem. Talk to people and ask, when people bring up issues, are they dealt with, or are they swept under the rug? Is there a process where if you're having a problem, people have successfully resolved the issue and gone on to do better work? Or do you find that you're living in a revolving door where people bring up issues, nothing is ever addressed, and as a result, you frequently have people leaving rather than issues being resolved? If that is the case, then this is probably a place that is not taking workplace DEI and culture seriously. You want to work for a place that not only invests in itself, but will invest in you as a part of its key asset. And then finally, look around, assess whether or not the company is looking at workforce from different levels. Look at look at the representation of the company. And this is not just to look for more people who look like you, although that's certainly one thing to look at. You want to see if there's representation across demographic categories, as well as just a mix of ideas and perspectives. Because if you see just one or two kinds of people, that isn't real diversity, and it really isn't a commitment to inclusion. Inclusion is an atmosphere where no matter who you are, where you come from, or what your perspective may be, we welcome it as long as you're bringing those skill sets to base in order to help us to get better at what we do. This is a company that is constantly looking for ideas and challenging itself to be better. So you want to look and see if there's representation from women, from ethnic and racial minorities, from the LGBTQ plus community, people with disabilities, and any other underrepresented group, which may differ from space to space in your own company. And also not just in your department, but across the company. So we're looking at entry level, mid-level, and most particularly leadership roles. And by the way, when we think about leadership roles, this includes your board of directors. All right. So those are your 3 tips for today. This has been part 2 of 3. And remember, when you're thinking, your part 2 tips are leadership commitment, written policies and practices, and looking at whether or not there is a diverse workforce. This topic continues at this same time next week at 12 p.m. for your Jedi Lunch Break Live. And we'll be back with our final 3 tips on how you know whether or not your company or organization is taking DEI and workplace culture seriously. I am, and still will be next week, Holly Holiday, your Jedi Master. If you have questions or thoughts or ideas that you want to hear explored, you'd like to get my perspective or take, please feel free to email us at jedi@holidayadvisors.com. In the meantime, we are working diligently to build up our social media, and we are on all platforms. So follow us, share, and subscribe on our Facebook, YouTube, and of course, right here on LinkedIn if you're watching live. Until next week, it's been great, and I'll see you next week. Bye. Did you enjoy this segment of Jedi Lunch Break Live? I'll be back next Thursday. Come on back and bring a friend.